Okay, so we looked at that, and then we also started off with your Kubernetes. Now, Kubernetes is another very popular container orchestration tool that we have. So we looked at your introduction, the various features you have, and then we looked at the different ways that you can set up your Kubernetes cluster. Now we need to look at setting up your cluster, right? Now there are different ways that you can set up your cluster. Um, you have your QADM. That's one tool which is available for you to set up your cluster. Then you have COPS. Now, COPS is a tool which can be used to set up the cluster on the AWS platform. Then you have Minikube. Now, if you want to, set up a single machine cluster, you can make use of your Minikube for that. And then you have your on the different AWS platform, you have the various services available. Like on AWS, you have the EKS service, which is your Kubernetes. On Azure, you have the AKS. On GCP, you have the GKE. So depending on the tool that you're using, you have the different options that are available. Now we are going to look at your COPS, and one very important thing that you'll have to remember with Kubernetes is that uh, it's a very heavy resource consuming tool. Okay, so you have to make sure that it has the right amount of resources. So you need a minimum of two CPU core and 4 GB RAM minimum. Okay, if not, your setup, your cluster will be very unstable. You won't be able to work with it. Okay, at the minimum, you will need that. So in our case, we are going to set up our cluster using COPS. Well, you can use COPS or Kubedium. Either way is fine, but you have to make sure you have at least two CPU core and 4 GB RAM. Now, in AWS, we have been until now we have been using the T.micro server. Now that is available under the free tier, but anything outside that, you'll have to pay money. So whatever I'm gonna do here to set up the cluster, I'm getting charged for that. Okay, so I would suggest you to maybe launch few virtual machines if possible, and then use that, like using VirtualBox or something like that, just to avoid the cost. uh Fine. So this is from the last week. Let me delete that. So what you can do is you can follow these instructions for setting up your cluster on the AWS using COPS tool. That is what we are going to do. Now, just to avoid some cost, I'm going to use two machines. Okay, only two machines, but you need minimum two machines, one master and one slave, right? So I'm going to set that up. Give me a moment. So Ubuntu is what we are going with. Then we'll have to go with T2 dot medium, 2 CPU core and 4 GB RAM. We need minimum, we will need that. Then the key pair to connect to the servers, my firewall. Sorry, let's go with the Linux. And we'll launch two instances. Let me give this 15 GB of storage and then launch. So will begin launching two instances. Okay, so one of this is going to be my manager and the other is going to be the worker machine. So your master and slave. So let's call this as cube manager, and this will be my cube. Let's wait for the machine to come up. Now essentially what we have to do, we have to connect to the machines, and there are a few commands that what actually, no, sorry, that is that is in terms of your sorry, that is in terms of your um, Kubedium. If you're working with KubeADM, we'll have to do this. So in terms of your cops, sorry for the confusion. So in terms of your cops, we just have to launch one instance, and then from there. Okay. So this is going to be my cops. So we'll have to install that cops tool. One second. One, two. This is fine. T2.micro for this is fine. My key pair that I'll use to connect to the server, my firewall, then launch instance. Okay, so one instance, and we will be setting up our cops. Okay, the two. So that's the cop server. So let's wait for the server to come up. But yeah, I mean, this is what we have to do. So below the steps, the below steps can be used to set up your cluster on the AWS platform by using this tool called cops. Okay, so first thing what we have to do is we have to install cops. So we can use this link to get the instructions, the commands that we have to run to set up our cops tool on this instance, the instance that we are using to set up the cluster. So let's quickly log into that server. So there's my server. So let me SSH into this. There's my server. So, sorry. So we'll use this link, and we'll install our cops tool first. So here you should have the instructions. So we are looking at Linux, and we just have to run these instructions one after the other. So we'll download the cops first, the binary files of your cops. Okay, here. Then we will give it the execute permission. So that should update the permissions. Now we will copy it to the bin folder. And that's it. So I can validate if you run this cops, you should be able to see this. And also you can check the version. So cops version, and there's the version. So my cops is installed. That's your step one. Once you have your cops, now the instance, we are going to update that. Then we are going to install our CLI tool. Okay, the AWS CLI tool that we have, we'll have to install that. Okay, then we'll install the CLI tool. Okay, I can validate AWS hyphen version, and there's my CLI installed. Okay. Next, we need to create an IAM user with the necessary permissions and programmatic access. So we'll have to go to the AWS, and we need to have an IAM user, because we are using the CLI over here to create the cluster. Okay. Now that will the server from where we are going to create the cluster, that server will need to have the necessary permission. So we are going to have an IAM user. You can use this if you already have a user, you can use that. But in our case, let's look at this user, and this has the admin access. So you need to make sure you have an IAM user with the administrator access. Post that, and also to make sure that the user has programmatic access specifically. Okay, so let me check if this user has programmatic access. Uh, Yeah, this is a CLI user, right? So it should be a programmatic access format. That's fine. Then generate the access key and secret key for the user. So we'll go to the user, we'll go to the security credentials, and here access key and secret key, we will generate that. So CLI is what we are going to use, understand, and then next create. So this should create the access key and secret key for me. Then log into the AWS from the COPS EC2 instance using the below command. So in the server, we will run this AWS configure command, and this will prompt me for the access key and secret key. We will provide that. So this will be the access key. This will be the secret key, the region. So I'm going to work with North Virginia region and the output format. So this should give the necessary access. The above command will prompt for the access key, secret key, region, and output, provide all the information. And then we'll need to create one S3 bucket. So this bucket will be used to store the cluster related information. So let's go to the S3 service and we will create one S3 bucket. Okay, let's create one bucket and create. So this is one. So here we have the bucket. Then we also need to have a DNS for this. So we need to create a hosted zone in Route 53. And for the DNS, I'm using the hosting. So, if you work with COPS, you need to have a DNS. If you're working with Cube ADM, you don't need a DNS. So if you want to experiment with this, you have to make sure, if you're using COPS, you have to make sure you have a DNS. If not, this will not work. So in our case, I have Hostinger. This is where I have registered my DNS. Okay, so this is the DNS I have. Now using this, we'll need to create a hosted zone. So let me go to the Route 53 and we'll go to hosted zones and we will create one hosted zone over here. Now let me call this as Kubernetes dot. So that's the uh, domain name. This is going to be public. We'll add the tags and then we will create this. Now this will create our NS records. Remember Route 53. So we'll have to add this in my Hostinger. Okay, so manage DNS and we start adding the NS records. So we'll give a name to this. Let's once we'll have to add the 4 records. Okay, I'll have to provide here. Sorry. That's one. 2, and that's 3, and then that's 4. Let's save this. And, this will be my NS record. So this will basically, blink or map my Route 53 with your host finger. Okay. Then, so add the NS records. Now install kubectl. Now what is kubectl? Now kubectl is a command line tool that we use to interact with the cluster. So we have different tools. Okay. So we have kops used to set up the Kubernetes cluster. Then we have kubectl used to interact with the cluster. Like create a pod or your storage or whatever you want to do. So basically giving the instructions. We do that by making use of your kubectl. Okay, so that is what we have to install. So again here you'll have the instructions. So you just have to kind of run these instructions one after the other. So we'll first download the so we'll install your we'll download your kubectl. Then we will I don't want to do this. I want to verify, install that. So whatever the binary file we have downloaded, we are installing that. And then finally you can validate whether it is installed or not. That's for your kubelet. Now, once you have your kubelet, generate the SSH keys. So we'll have to run this command. This will generate the SSH keys for us. And then finally run the below command to create your cluster. Okay, so you may have to update the settings based on your requirement, but let me tell you what I'm doing here. So we're using kops to create a cluster. This is the name we are giving. The S3 bucket. So remember we created an S3 bucket. So S3 bucket is where all the Kubernetes, the cluster related information will be stored. So we'll need to provide that S3 bucket over here. Then we are specifying the zone, the availability zone in which the resources needs to be created. Okay. Then how many nodes you want, the slave machines. What is the node instance type? How many master machines you want? Oh, sorry, the instance type. And then your hosted zone name. We'll need to provide that. Does this make sense, the command?
Yes, Ravi. So like the record types, like we have to use only name server, is it? Like we have other record type also, right? Some like SOA and all, A type.
So that is only for connecting your hosted zone with your DNS.
Okay.
That we make use of your NS records.
Okay.
Okay. So in my case, the S3 bucket will change. So this is the name of the S3 bucket. So let me provide that. And the rest of the things are fine. Okay, so I want one slave machine and one master machine. So we just have to run this command. And this will start. So everything needed as part of your cluster. It will create a new VPC, it will create new security groups, it will create new records, so it will create new IAM role. So everything needed as part of your cluster will be taken care by your kops. So now we just have to update this cluster. I also need to provide my S3 bucket. This will take like 5 to 10 minutes to set up the cluster for us. So if you go to the AWS console, you should be able to see some changes. For example, so this S3 bucket, you see. Likewise, if you look at the DNS, this is still not happened. And if you look at your instances, you see there's my node, one node machine and one master machine will be created for. So basically, everything needed as part of your cluster will be taken care by your COPS tool. Does that make sense?
Yes, Ravi.
So you can see that's a control plane, which is your master. That's a node machine, which is your slave machine. So, this is where the setup can be a little complex with your Kubernetes, because you have to run a lot of commands to set it up. So it can be a little complex, but if you get that understanding, it becomes easier. So yeah, here you can see, adding the record. So everything will be taken care by your cops. You don't have to worry about any of those things. So now you can use this kubectl tool. So kubectl get nodes. If you run this command, so this will basically tell you how many machines you have as part of your cluster. Okay. Now, like I said, this will take 5 to 10 minutes. I'm not getting the output because in the background, still the work is happening. But once your cluster is ready, when I run this command, it will show me how many nodes I have. This is basically how you can set up your cluster, Kubernetes cluster using COPS tool. Any questions? Please let me know.
No, Ravi.
No, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so this will take some time. We'll have to wait for that. Let's wait that. You can also use this Fox validate cluster to validate. So you can see validation failed. Oh, sorry. Provide the S3 bucket here. As you can see, cluster not yet healthy. So we'll have to give it some time. So you can see here, I have two machines, the control plane and the node machine, what it is using and everything. Validation error. So you can see there's a validation failed with the API server. So it is not yet healthy. We'll have to wait. It will take some time, but eventually your cluster will become healthy and you can start working with your cluster. Okay. But yeah, I mean, that's the only thing I see with your Kubernetes, the setup part. But once you overcome that, it becomes easier to work with it. Okay. Now looking at other things, working with your Kubernetes. Now, the first thing we look at your Kubernetes is your pods. Now, what are pods? Pods are simply your containers. In Docker, we the application, the containerized application, right? We call them as containers, right? The same way in Kubernetes, we call them as your pods. Okay, so are pods can have one or more containers coupled together. So your pods, you can have more more than one container. What suggested is one, but you can have more than one container. So these are your basic unit of your Kubernetes, and to increase the high availability, it is always preferred to run your pods in replica. So running multiple pods. So if you want to make your application highly available, if you want to make your container highly available, it is recommended to run replicas of your pods. Okay. Now, so there are different things that you'll need to understand over here. So you have your pods. Now pods are your containers. Now, which are nothing but your applications, right? So inside these containers, you'll be running your applications. Now, once you're done running your application as a container, the next step would be for you to access these containers, the applications, right? How do you do that? Now, that's where we make use of your services. Now, services is used to expose the containers so that we can access the application over the internet. So services are sorry. So services are used to load balance the traffic among the pods. So basically, as a user, whenever I want to access the application, we make use of a service for that. So this allows it follows your round robin distribution among the healthy pods. So you can have multiple pods running behind a service. Now this acts as a load balancer. So as a user, what we do is we hit the service. The service in turn will hit the pod and get the response back to us. Does it make sense, the difference between pods and services?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you also have something known as ingress. I'll talk about this separately. I'm not going to talk about that now. So now, let's say I want to create a container in Kubernetes. So this is still pending. So we'll have to give it some more time. So you can see the node status control plane. So has not yet joined the cluster. So it will take some more time. But if I try this, kubectl get, as you can see, control plane is ready, but my node machine is not yet ready. So it will take some time. That's fine. We'll give it some time. Now, with your Kubernetes, now let's say, for example, I want to create a pod. Now, what is your pod? Pod is simply a container. Now, if you want to create your container, we Limpo, sorry, guys, give me one moment. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so let's try this once again. And okay, now you can see both the nodes are available. So that means my cluster is ready. And here also you can see your cluster is ready to use. So it will take some time, but yeah, eventually your cluster will be up and running. Now, let's say I want to create a simple container. Now, all the instructions we provide it in a YAML file. Okay. Now, one moment. Now, so as I was saying, we define all the instructions in a YAML file. Now, this is an example YAML file we have. Let's say you want to create a pod, right? So let's say Kubernetes pod YAML for Nginx, let's say, for the sake of example. Here, I should be able to see an example for your creating an Nginx container. Okay, so there's a repo that I can refer to. Pods. Pods 101. Okay, so let's look at this. So here you should be able to see a simple example. Yeah, so this is a very simple example that we have. Now, the first thing we do is we define the API version. So here, API is what we use to give all the instructions. Remember, we have an API server. So we need to specify which version of the API you want to use. So depending on the Now, so depending on the kind of resource that you are creating, you will need to define the API version. Okay. So for your pod, you can see the kind. This is where we specify the kind of resource that you want to create. So we have pod, we have deployments, we have services, we have secrets. So everything, this is what we use to specify what resource we want to create. Then we can give some metadata. Now metadata is additional information. So any additional information you want to provide, you can provide that by making use of your metadata. So in this case, we are giving it a name and we are calling it as a web server. Then we give your specifications. So, which image you want to use, how many containers you want to run, all that information we define in the specifications. Okay. So we want to create containers. Now, what is the name you want to give to this container? So this is what we are using, and we are going to call it as web server. Now, which image do you want to use? So I want to use Nginx image. So basically, we are giving the instructions. We are defining the instructions as to what exactly we want to do here. Okay. So Nginx is what we want to use, and then the port. Remember the port mappings we do in Docker, the same thing. So on what port number you want to run this? I want to run this on port 80. So this becomes a very simple YAML file for creating a pod for me. So again, what we want to create, containers and then the information related to the container. Now, unlike your Docker, with your Kubernetes, you don't have that naming convention that we will have to follow. So you can create a YAML file with whatever name you want. Okay, so let me create a folder with the name Kubernetes, and let me create pods, and let's say pod1.yaml, and then the instructions. Any questions with the instructions that we have defined here?
Ravi.
Once you have this YAML file, how do you execute this? Well, you just have to run this command called kubectl create -f and then your YAML file. We just have to run this. So whatever the instructions we have in the YAML file, it will start executing that for us. So kubectl create pod1.yaml, and this will go ahead and create a pod for me. Now you can list this. So kubectl get pods. So this will show you all the pods. You can see this is the name we gave, and we have one container running inside this, and this is running, and this was created 8 seconds ago. Now you can get the details of this. So you can use this kubectl describe pod and the pod name. So this will give you additional information about that pod. So the name, namespace, service account, on which node this is running, when this was started, what's the IP address, then the container ID, which image you're using, the port mappings that you have done, when this was started. All this information will be available for you. So now we have created a pod. Now to access this pod, we will need to create a service. So again, we can define a service.yaml file, and then within this we give the instructions. We'll talk about this later, but do you get an idea about how you can create your pods? Okay. Likewise, yeah, sorry. Any questions, anything?
No, Ravi.
No, sir.
Okay. So likewise, you have your deployments. Now, what are deployments? Deployments are your collection of pods. So multiple pods together, we call it as a deployments. So this is another type of resource. This will be your collection of pods. So whenever you want to run multiple pods, we make use of your deployments for that. So deployment in Kubernetes is a controller which helps your application reach the desired state. The desired state defined inside the deployment file. So as to, let's say, you can think of it as an auto scaling group. Not exactly an auto scaling group, but concept wise. So what this deployment does is it helps you to maintain a specified number of pods. So let's say at any point you want 5 pods. No matter what happens, you want 5 pods. You can make use of your deployments for that. Now, what happens if a pod goes down or if 2 pods go down? Your deployment will your deployments will automatically create new pods for you to make sure you have that desired state. That's your deployments. Okay, so I'll show an example for this. But here, this is, you can see, this is for your deployment. So what this will do is this will create 3 pods for me. So you see this replicas that I'm using. I'm using this to tell that I want 3 pods, right? Now, so you can see here the type. So let me show over here. Let me go to my, this is my deployment, and this is the instruction we have. So we are creating the resource type deployment, and we are telling we want 3 replicas. So let me take this and let me create a deployment YAML file. And again, you can see, so I'm using the name, image, the container ports and everything. So let me save this, and I'll say kubectl create -f and then the file name. So this will create a deployment for me. So kubectl get pods, sorry, get pods. You can see 3, right? And likewise, if I say kubectl get deployments, There's the deployment that we created. So 3 of 3 ready, 3 up to date, 3 available. This was created 19 seconds ago. And now I have the pods. Now, for any reason, if any of the pod gets deleted, so let's say kubectl delete pod, your deployment will automatically bring up new pods for you. So you can see this one 5 seconds. Because of the desired state we have specified, which is 3 replicas, your deployments will make sure it always has that state, that number that we have specified. Now that's where we can make use of your deployments. Questions?
No, Ravi.
No, sir.
So creating a deployment. So once the file is created, to deploy this deployment, you can use this command kubectl create -f and then the YAML file name. This will go ahead and start executing the instructions we have defined in the YAML file. Now to list your pods, you can either use this command kubectl get po or kubectl get pods. So this will list the number of pods with the number of replicas that we specified in the deployment file. So, kubectl get pods. So the number of pods we have. I'm going to stop here. Tomorrow we'll talk about your service, how you can create the service. I'll show this tomorrow. Any questions until here?
No, Ravi.
No, sir.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow then.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.